Well, hello there. Wade Skalsky here, host of the Tactical Business Podcast. And today I'm here with SEO expert, freelance writer, in general, just bad man in general, in a good way, John McCoy. John, how are you doing, sir?
Good. How you doing, Wade? Good to talk to you again.
Good to chat again, man. Are you staying cool, or are you having sort of an Indian summer, or what's going on where you're at?
I wouldn't call it an Indian summer. I'd say apocalyptic, probably.
Nice. Things are just about to start on fire.
Yes. Yeah, we're like this close.
Without getting too specific, what part of the United States are you in generally?
I'm in between Nebraska and Oklahoma, right between those two. So that pretty narrows it down.
I vaguely know where that is. So that's good. I mean, you're not in Arizona. That's where I lived for a long time. And there things do start on fire.
Yes, they do.
Good. Well, I'm excited to talk to you today. We're going to be talking about writing. We're going to be talking about SEO. We're going to be talking about firearms. Here on the Tactical Business Podcast, we like to talk about all of those things. Let's do a little backstory, though, for those who may not sort of know, kind of how you got to where you are, how you got into the writing game. Give us a little sort of origin story of where you started.
Sure. So we'll take it back to pre 9/11. I was a college freshman when it happened, and kind of hated school and didn't have really a lot of direction for life. So I enlisted in the Air Force after 9/11 and did 4 years in Texas and then another 9 years in the Kansas Air National Guard. I guess I just gave away where I live. So
well, I think most people can figure out where that state is located between,
Exactly. So I have always been, kind of in that crowd. Never on the tactical end. This is all support, as an aircraft mechanic in the Air Force. And then, but I grew up shooting, and it was always just probably my favorite hobby. And it was in good company in the Air Force. There were a lot of rednecks from the Midwest that enlisted, and so we would always talk guns, and that just never really left me. After my time in the Air Force, I transitioned to a civilian role with the Army, and worked for them for another 7.5 years. But I went ahead and got away from the Air National Guard. It was just, since it wasn't a full-time thing, it was just leeching too much of my time, too much of my life. And at the time, because of some personal woes that we don't have to get into, we were really tight. And the difference, my monthly drill check with the Guard was about $350 a month. And at the time, that made that a lot of difference to me. And we were just trying to figure out how to scrape up another $350 a month. And this would have been late 2015. And Upwork, which I know you're familiar with, had just changed its name from Odesk, I believe. And I'd never heard of it. I couldn't have identified what a freelance writer is or what they do. But I found it, and I went ahead and built a profile. I'd basically forgotten all about it. And after a couple of months of it just sitting there, the way it used to work, you could take these skills assessments, and I don't think they're on there anymore. But I was one of a very small handful of people that had aviation on theirs. And I will get to how I got into guns, but it actually all started with aviation. And this guy reached out to me, and I think it was like $10 an hour, and I was editing his newsletter for it's like 20 or 30 hours a month. And it pretty much replaced my drill pay. And that was kind of like the proof of concept. I'm like, hey, you really can make money on here. But I wasn't really sure in terms of scale. I was just like, well, $200 or $300 a month is pretty, it was what I needed at the time. So fast forward a couple of years, and I'd been doing, I guess it's only about a year. I've been doing that contract and picking up a couple of small ones. There were 20 or $30 here or there. But there was evidence that you could really do this. You could do this full time. And so, but I wasn't really thinking about that. And one day, because all of my feed was just populated with aviation stuff. And one day I was like, I should just see if I can find any gun gigs on there. And lo and behold, I just put in firearms, I think was the first search that I put in there. And it brought up, it was ammoseek.com, I think. It's one of those sites that kind of aggregates the best ammo prices.
I buy ammo off of there, so I get it.
Yes. Okay. It was Ammo Seeker. It was another one, similar name, same idea.
Right.
It was just an aggregate website where they're pulling in all that stuff. And I saw the ad, and they were looking for someone that had firearms writing experience. So I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna shoot them straight and let them know that I wasn't BSing. I actually know. So I was talking about an AR build that I had just done, and just gun stuff that a non firearms enthusiast would not know what I was talking about. And I think he got back with me in like 10 minutes, and he's like, "Yeah, you're on." And so I was writing ammo. It was all ammunition descriptions, like listing descriptions for all these different ones. Like 40 grain, 22 long rifle, and then Winchester double op buck. He'd give me a list of them, and I had to write these like 200-word descriptions for each one. And so that was really how I broke into the firearms side. And ever since then, I've had kind of two distinctly separate sides of kind of mechanical / aviation side. And then the firearm side is kind of like it's off to the other side because those two communities, aircraft mechanics and stuff, they're usually shooters. They're more in that camp. But I do a lot of writing with like corporate aviation, and they're a little more proper. So I kind of keep those two sides apart from each other.
Yeah.
And
a lot of people that aren't in the firearms industry don't realize that the closer that you get to engineer, the more likely it is that person shoots, right?
yes, oh, absolutely.
Right. And so
but the suits are not in that. They are very much kind of in the alphabet soup of he, him type of, they're in that camp,
right?
And right. But yeah, you're absolutely right. The closer you get to the nuts and the bolts of the aircraft, there's a lot of, the Venn diagram becomes a circle at that point.
Right.
And,
there's, I think
between rednecks that shoot and rednecks that wrench.
Yeah. Yeah. You touch on a really good point too, about the fact that if you're going to write for that industry, it's definitely something that you have to have some experience in to at least be able to, because people will be able to identify right away if you know what you're writing about or not.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's 100%. When I was talking to him specifics about my build, that was it. He knew that I was a gun guy. I couldn't bluff that because, just a writer who's dropping 100 applications a day, he probably doesn't know what a bolt carrier group is, So I was kind of describing and saying what I built with, and the company is about it from. So that was the first one that I actually had some real traction in the industry. And then Night Vision Sights, they do night sights. They were a startup at the time. This would have been like 2017-ish. They brought me on. I did some more, I think that was maybe still descriptions, but I think I did a couple blog posts for them. And the other thing I found about that's really cool about the gun industry and is that they send you swag. I'd never written in any other industry that sends you anything. And then I'm like, oh, this is awesome. These guys send me stuff. Like they sent me a set of night sights for my M&P. And I was like, well, that's pretty cool.
Right.
And
yeah,
they're still on there. So, so I wrote for them for a few months. And then my first kind of bigger break, while I'm still just a part, this is still like 2017 to 2020-ish. I landed with Widener's. They're kind of a competitor with Brownells and Midway. Kind of in that camp. A lot of reloading supplies, selling parts for ARs and stuff like that. But they're a little bit more heavily, kind of like Brownells, in the space of reloading stuff. So I wrote for them for a while, and then that one just kind of petered out. And so I did a lot of like kind of one-off gigs in the firearm space, probably up until about 2020. Actually until 2021, 2022. Maybe even right now. Really, this is the first time that I've seen that as not being so much of a side product, but I want to lean into it, like completely lean into that industry. So anyway, I ended up picking up a few other gigs here and there. And then my big one that's been one of my not necessarily bread and butter monetarily, but definitely my biggest gun contract has been Bear Creek Arsenal. and which I can say that because I have they gave me a byline, so my name's on all of my stuff. So that's been awesome. A lot of traction, a lot of visibility on those posts. So that brings me up to 2021, and 2020 chaos ensues. I was a federal employee, and without getting too much in the politics, I spent 13 and a half years in the military, getting inoculated for everything under God's green earth. And when 2021 rolled around and it was kind of obvious where things were going, my wife and I have been kicking around the idea of me taking on writing full time. And I knew that a mandate for a certain thing was going to get issued. And I said, I'm not doing it. I had to when I was wearing the uniform. I'm not doing it anymore. So April 2021, basically I packed my bags and said goodbye to civil service and the military altogether, and hit the ground running as a writer. And here I am now.
And you've been writing ever since.
Yep, absolutely.
So, and I think you touched on a lot of really good points. Point number one is that, the content writing by itself is a hard gig, right? So, writing anything online, writing for businesses online, just by itself is a hard gig. In terms of the firearms community, there's a whole nother level of complexity there because, like you said, you've got to be knowledgeable about what you're writing about, or people are going to sniff that out right away. You have to have background, right?
Yes.
But then there's the compliance issues because you've got all sorts. It's a very regulated industry. So then you have all these sort of compliance issues. So walk me through a little bit sort of the difference that you had between going from more content to more the SEO side. And maybe some people might not even know about, how SEO works or what it is. Kind of, if you could just kind of walk me through that for a little bit, and we'll go from there.
Yeah. So it's funny. My very first gig, that going way back to the newsletter, he was like, you're going to be doing editing, but you also need to do some writing. I was like, oh, okay. I have no clue what I'm doing. None whatsoever. No idea. And he's like, try to make sure you optimize it for SEO. And I'm like I said, this is like early 2016. And I'm like, what's SEO? So I go Google it. I'm like, oh, okay. Search engine optimization. That makes sense. You want Google to see it. So that was my very first, I was such a rank novice 7 years ago. I didn't even know what it was. I had never heard of the term. And so I mean, my skills in it were totally rudimentary for a long time. And I mean, the thing about SEO is that it is not a static, it's a completely dynamic process. It is always changing. So, the faster someone, especially if anyone's aspiring to be into this, is understanding that the game is always in a perpetual state of motion. It is never sitting still, because the algorithms are always changing. The things that Google and Bing are looking for are always changing. And then there's always new search engines, DuckDuckGo entering the mix, and there's a few others. But so you always have to be on your toes. But I didn't start with an interest in SEO. It was just a means to an end to make me a better writer and to make my writing more persuasive, but more importantly, to get it ranking. It really wasn't until probably I started talking to you 6, 8 months, a year ago. I don't know. That I started realizing that people were not really so interested in the writing component as they were the SEO component. Because if you go on LinkedIn or X Twitter, I don't know what to call it anymore. I like to call it X Twitter because it's kind of like an X. Right. If you just look for writers, you will be absolutely inundated with writers. Whether or not they've ever produced a single piece of content published anywhere besides Twitter is hard to verify, but they're everywhere. But everyone is interested in SEO because I think there's kind of a mysticism around it. Like it's something that is not achievable, which is crazy because I assure you, if you can write emails and people will pay you for them, you can absolutely understand SEO. It's a fairly wrapped up in all of its complexities. The idea is pretty simple, that you want to look for keywords and phrases that people are looking for. Really, SEO at its most boiled down point is just understanding human nature, because you're trying to get their eyeballs on the thing that you are talking about. And you want to do that better than the other guy who's got basically an identical service or product. who's also trying to get eyeballs on it. So it's kind of a chess match.
Well, it's a system like anything else, right? And that's what I
Yes,
think.
totally.
Once people understand that, especially business owners, business owners think it's a tech thing, right? So